Jobs and Business Development Committee meeting of Los Angeles City Council for today, Tuesday, June 5th, 2012. I'm Council Member Eric Garcetti, the chair of the committee. We do expect at least one, if not both, the other council members here. But in the meantime, this is a big day because we have our Workforce Investment Board annual plan, our WIA plan, presented to us. It's kind of like deja vu all over again. I feel like this could have been 10 years ago. I had many years overseeing this, and it's nice to be back in the saddle, and hopefully I'll remember a thing or two, and it's nice to see the progress we've made. But why don't we officially announce what, well, do we have any general public comment first? No. None? So we'll close our general public comment. It's a special meeting, actually. We don't have general public comment for the record, so let's go ahead and I think we can. Let's take the annual plan first. Are we taking these all together? Modifications, the annual plan, and then while we wait for the number two, let's take 1 and 3 together.
Okay, 1 and 3 together.
Item number 1 is a Community Development Department and Workforce Investment Board joint report relative to the Workforce Investment Board carry-in report and 2011-2012 annual plan budget proposed modifications. Item number 3 is a CDD and WIB joint report and city CAO and CLA reports relative to the year 13 Workforce Investment Board annual plan from July 1st, 2012 through June 30th, 2013.
All right, would our representatives like to come forward? Why don't you queue up the coming year with what we're carrying over from the past year, and we'll start with that. For the general public, of whom there may be 1 or 2 listening, this is one of the largest budgets that goes under reported and under examined. That's not to say there's not a lot of great work inside the city family on this, but I always try to point that out because our city's regular budget has so much attention, but this and our consolidated plan have significant millions of dollars of funding that sometimes go unnoticed. So it's a good time for folks to be able to focus in on what we're doing to get people back to work. So with that, you going to start up, Mr. Sines?
Robert Sines, Assistant General Manager, CDD, and it's great to see you on that side of the table on this particular issue. I know you've been a leader for us on the workforce issues, and we greatly appreciate all of your efforts that you've done over the years. And even though you haven't been chair, I know that you've been supportive in many of our endeavors. I think what you'll find in this plan is a really great integrated process that we've done with our Workforce Investment Board. And I'll turn it over to Greg in a couple of minutes so we could talk about the vision that we've worked collaboratively over the years. And if you remember, I think the WIB and CDD and the city itself were just trying to get their legs underneath them about addressing workforce issues in a broad sense and how it's integrated in terms of the economic development activities of the city. I think you'd be pleased to see the progress that we've made and the systems that we've built. We've suffered and continue to suffer some of the greatest economic disaster for our workforce over the last 3 years. We suffer one of the highest unemployment rates in the city and one of the highest underemployment rates in the country.
What are those numbers? I've read them, but why don't we?
It's been hovering on average close to 13%, where the state has been near 11%, and nationally has fluctuated right around 8.5%, between 8.5% and 9%. It hasn't changed dramatically. One of the reasons in the city of Los Angeles that the unemployment rate has continued and persist, and this is my belief, has been because of the educational status of our population and the continued dropout rates that we have and the undereducation of our population. So I do think that when we look at workforce development, we're not just talking about training. We are talking about economic development, we are talking about education, and we're talking about education reform. And all 3 of those need to be talked in the same breath. And in our plan, even though the investments on the federal level has subsided after the initial ARA funds that were provided by the Obama administration, we've continued to keep our systems in place. We've continued to leverage other funding and continue to bring in other resources within the city.
Although you have about 50% increase over what we were pre-ARA funds, correct? Or is that just the consolidation of those two programs? As
Yeah,
represented here?
right. It's more of the consolidation of the two programs.
Okay.
The ARA funds over all three of our funds, Discada Worker, Adult, and Youth, really increased our total pot by almost 50%. And
So
we're
we're at 40 to 90, and now we're at 60?
right.
But is that increase in 20, in other words, from the 40, is that an increase overall in the base, or was it the consolidation of the?
It was an increase of the base. It was both. It was an increase in the base and the consolidation. One of the benefits that we've had over the last couple of years is that and it's actually tied to a negative, is because of the high unemployment that we've had and the number of mass layoffs, we've actually increased our base because it's formula driven. So while we're glad to say that we didn't take devastating cuts, it's really because of a real high negative that we have. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Greg to give the WIB's overall vision and leadership that's provided to this, and then we'll delve into the fine technical work that Beryl has done on the report. And Julie O'Leary's here, which I'll ask her to come up front, who actually on our staff put the plan together. So.
Morning, Mr. Chair. Greg Irish, Workforce Investment Board. What you have before you is our blueprint for workforce development, sort of our Bible over the next year that's got every activity that we're going to engage in terms of workforce development activities. It reflects $62 million of expenditures. Out of that, $50 million comes from federal sources, WIA sources, et cetera. Carryover funds, those are savings from that we're anticipating from this year. The balance is non-WIA formula funds, Workforce Investment Act formula funds, as well as other funds that are contributed, community development, block grant funds, et cetera. These funds will actually support our two systems, as Robert said. And by the way, that's what we're talking about, $62 million is less than the current year. The current year is almost $68 million, so we're anticipating what's going on in Washington. We're always watching what's happening in Washington. Perhaps we may have less money in the future. And what we try to do with our carry-in funds, and that's one of the items on the agenda, whatever we don't spend carries forward to the next year. Of course, you can carry 20% of your funding from one year to the next. We don't always do it intentionally. But we have to, the money that we carry in, it's called FIFO. We have to first in, first out. We have to expend that money first in the following year. So you've got a $62 million plan, maintains our system of 18 workforce centers, 3 satellites. Those are the adult employment centers. It also maintains, or will be a new system, it will maintain a brand new youth delivery system that connects with young folks who are dropouts or out-of-school youth. We're also partnering with the Los Angeles Unified School District to deal with those young folks who are disconnected from school and from work. As you know, the WIB actually funded a study, the 1 out of 5 study, which pretty much explained the pathologies of youth in the city of LA. As Robert mentioned, we're one of the highest unemployment areas in the country. The WIB supports training because we do have folks who are at educational levels that don't make them employable. So we're actually expanding training. The state actually implemented some legislation requiring more expenditures on training. We realize that's the future. But one thing that wasn't said, even though we do have folks who don't have the academic credentials, we also have the highest unemployment rate for those with college degrees. So that's the dichotomy of those who are undereducated. We need to deal with them as well. But we're seeing a new customer coming into our centers as well. Those are college graduates who can't find jobs.
What's that unemployment rate, do you know?
I don't have it. Maybe Julie can elaborate on it. We did present that before the WIB. So, of course, economic development and workforce development are inextricably linked. We know the council and the mayor are trying to do some things to make sure that we can generate jobs, we can create jobs. Our job is not necessarily economic development. It's to meet the needs once that you create an environment within the city that allows businesses to grow. Our job is to make sure that our product is human capital. That's what we're attempting to do with this plan. Okay.
Beryl Taylor from the CEO's office. We recommend approval for CDD to accept the grant funds, negotiate and execute the agreements that are included in the attachment and in the recommendations to the report.
And also to accept the carryover funds as well, in number 1?
Yes.
Okay. You're the author.
Yes, I am. At least coordinating for a lot of the input that we got. We had tremendous input from our WIB, went to multiple committees, so we believe that this does represent their interest and then also the interest of the city as well going forward.
So are you the woman with the answers if I have questions?
If you give me time to flip to a
Sure,
page,
sure.
yes, I will.
Okay, absolutely. Well, very well written, but first of all. Congratulations on that. And we're joined by Mr. Parks. We just are taking up item 1 and 3 together. So 1 is the carryover funds and 3 is the Workforce Investment Board plan for the coming year. By the way, I should say 13's always been a lucky number for me, like Council District 13. So I appreciated the number. So I have a number of things I'd like to cover, so I will just jump in. First of all, on the training front, one of the things that we did wasn't 10 or 11 years ago, I think it was probably about 9 years ago, is we started looking at sector-based initiatives and training. And there's a lot of people still misquoting a lot of statistics on what percentage we spend on training. But here you've adopted a mandate of 20%, correct? So 20% of dollars would be training, and those aren't necessarily all sector-based training, right? That can be individual training well, then there's 5% on top of that support services, correct?
Right.
So 20% is before support services, and that's support services for training. In other words, people who need childcare or need certain services to be able to get to the training and be there, public transportation, et cetera.
We can clarify that.
Yeah,
You wanna-
actually, for the new year, it'll be 25%.
25%.
For training.
Okay, so
It's-
25%.
For the current year that's ending, it's at 20% with the 5% limit.
Somebody was saying the other day that it was still 12% of the city's funds.
No,
were used on training.
it'll be 25%. Out of that, they can leverage, out of the 25, 5% can be leveraged from other sources. It's state law. We were instrumental in or involved in the passage of that. And as you know, every year we've increased the percentage of money that's going towards training. We started out, from 5%, we went to 10%, 15%, 20% this year. We're going to 25% beginning July 1st.
So what percentage of that is sector-based initiative money? You know?
Do you have that, Julie?
Yeah. You said that you'd let me.
Okay, yeah, you take your time. While you're flipping through that, question number 2.
For new money, we're at about 5%, but we're also bringing an additional 3.3 million for contracts that are starting at the end of this year that will be continuing through June of 2013.
So no, it's not 5% or 25%, it's 5% overall?
Overall, yeah.
So about a fifth of that is in sector-based?
Yes.
Okay.
Councilman, in the hard dollars, is that $4 million was set aside in the last plan, and we did a full RFP, vetted a number of initiatives, and we're funding out the $4 million this current year.
And that covers the 10 sectors?
Right. And right.
Can anybody name them without looking?
We need Larry Frank here for that, but
Let's see. Security, hospitality,
Healthcare,
which you
healthcare,
started.
entertainment.
security, private security,
Biocheck.
logistics, transportation,
Biocheck.
and
Finance.
Finance, banking, healthcare, can't forget,
Healthcare started,
and green job. All right, that's up to 8.
construction, and biotech, biomedical.
So walk us through the non-sector based, which one?
Page 2-19 has them all listed.
There we go. Childcare, that was the one that was missing.
Yeah.
So walk us through for a second the non-sector based training and how that money is spent and how folks are identified to be the recipients of training. Is that existing training programs in our community colleges and other places? What is that?
Right. So first, we go back to the history of the sector training. You were funded the first sector-based training that we did within the WIB. Although you've moved on to different committees, I've actually stayed in this chair for a number of years, and we've grown the healthcare sector initiatives. And what we learned, it took a couple years to get our legs with that as well. But one of the things that we did learn in the overall sector-based training is that we had to not develop boutique programs because they're highly expensive and the funding that we have would be very limited. So if we did that, we would maybe only hit a couple thousand city residents where we have a need for really tens of thousands of services. So in addition of growing the sector initiatives, the other part that we've grown is the partnerships and the partnerships with the community college and the partnerships with the adult ed. And I'll talk about the adult ed in a little bit because that is a severe crisis facing us. But on the community college partnerships over the last 5 years, we've actually gone on to co-locations. City College had our first co-location with MCS. We're looking to co-locate at Harbor College on our youth funding. We're talking and have had great relationships with Trade Tech, and we don't have a formal co-location office there, but we have staff there all the time. We work very distinctly with Valley College and with Lenny Schifo and his groups up there. So out of about 5 of the 9 colleges, we have some very, very strong partnerships moving forward. We've also encouraged our counterparts, the County of LA, to actually partner with East LA College and Southwest College, which are in the county areas. And Southwest College, in particular, serving the largest percentage of African American students. So we think it's very, very important given the unemployment rates that for the African American male population. And Greg could talk about an initiative that we're proposing as well in that particular area. So the partnerships that we've established is where we're looking at our system to be the feeder to the schools, and many of our, almost all of our work sources centers have a one-on-one relationship with their particular school in the area, where folks are referred to the school itself. We estimate that probably about 20% of our total population that's enrolled is in a form of training, one form or another, not necessarily paid through the sector partnerships. So they're either co-enrolled with us and the community college or adult ed.
How do you measure those outcomes then? Because I mean, obviously, there's a crisis in community college education nationally in terms of follow through and finishing. There's different measures. Graduation is one, but a job can be another. Trade Tech obviously oftentimes doesn't have a graduation, but you actually have somebody picking up a job, which is at least as good as a degree,
Right.
if not better. But how are you tracking those outcomes?
So in our system, we actually track the direct placement. So we could get you the actual numbers of folks that are co-enrolled and directly placed. Unfortunately, on the community college level, when they look at their success, they have not looked at job placement as a part of their success.
But we do.
Yeah, we do. And
Do you know what that percentage is, roughly? Does anybody know at the table?
I don't off the top of my head. We can't
That's
get
an
that.
important number. I
Yeah,
mean, that's
we can
the
get that.
rubber hits the road of how effective we're being.
Right.
And, you know, that's something that we should be tracking year to year if it's not in here. Because, you know, ultimately, and comparing that with, you know, sector-based initiatives or campus versus campus, you know, where we're putting our money. Obviously, we want to spread it around geographically so people have access, but I think there's also a move in community colleges right now to potentially specialize and not try to be in the face of the cuts all things to all people and all campuses. And so if we move towards that, that would be important. It looks
Yeah.
like you found some stats.
Well, for placements in general, which would include those through community college and elsewhere, for last year, we were at 80%.
What page you on?
I'm looking at the tab 8,
Uh-huh.
which is the 10-11 performance evaluation, and it's page 8-4, and you will need your magnifying glasses. It'd be
Good thing I
looking,
got that LASIK surgery.
yeah. You can see placement rate is in columns I through N, and you can see that it's a comparison of what their plan was in their contract to what was actually accomplished. So I'm looking down at the very bottom where we were in at columns J and M as in maybe. You could see the 79.3 and 80% just represents the two funding streams.
So for folks that are actually coming in and finishing a training, we're having that high of a placement rate in this economy?
No, this would include everyone, but
It's
we
everyone.
can run those who have just gone through training to find out what's the placement rate.
We
for
can
just
run those numbers. The WIA performance metrics, and by the way, they're negotiated between the state of California and the feds, then we have most of the burden of performing for California in terms of being the largest jurisdiction in the state as well as the second largest in the country. But the performance metrics are placement, wages, at what wage folks are placed, and how long they stay on the job. So placement, wages, and retention on the job. Those are the federal performance metrics. We also impose some local performance metrics on our providers as well. Customer satisfaction. In certain cases, we're talking about training-related placements for our sector initiatives. So we have local standards and we have national standards, and we're one of the highest performers in the country.
Congratulations on that. Do we have a chart of that placement wages retention?
We can certainly get you that.
Okay.
For retention, we do have retention in columns U through Z, but this represents
Retention
our
rate.
entire population,
entire
not just the
population of
community
And what
college.
does that mean as a percentage of retention rate? Is there a certain amount of months that they're getting at least to, and it's like 50%? Is that 50% staying in 6 months, or? What is the retention measure there?
So it has to do with how many, this is the complicated WIA language on after they exit and looking at the quarters after that, how many of those, of everybody who exited, how many were still in jobs. And so
Still in jobs over what time period? Over next 1 quarter or 4 quarters?
No, this was over 2 quarters,
2 quarters.
after they exited. So that would represent,
It's actually 3,
oh, sorry.
90, 180, 120, and 180 days after. So at 3 points in time, everyone is gauged as to whether they're still on the job.
And this is some overall percentage based on each one of those averaged out? Okay. And are we ever doing anything like any spot checks or looking like at a year later or any assessments? Do we have to do that?
That was actually a recommendation by the controller, which we plan on doing this year. We saw our retention rates go down a little bit. And what we're going to do is follow up and see why the retention rates are going down.
Yeah.
We would assume that because of what's going on with the economy, we got caught in some layoffs, and as a result, some folks were laid off after they were placed.
The other major issue is our partnership with the adult ed with LA Unified, and we've always had a good relationship with the adult ed program. They're going through a severe crisis right now, and we talked about adding to our unemployment rates. There is, I think we've heard upwards of 4,000 folks just out of the adult ed division to be laid off. We do and have been encouraging the school board members to actually bring together a high-level group of folks, including us from the city and from our Workforce Investment Board, to work with them to vision out something greater than what they're currently discussing right now, because they're looking at retrenchment of 75-80% of their overall salary. I mean, their overall budget.
Right.
And so it's a major policy issue for the city.
Yeah, we've been very active on that. Thank you for bringing that up. Let me jump around because I also want to leave time for Mr. Parks as well. A couple other things. Let's go to youth and youth jobs for a second. In our youth delivery system, how are we identifying youth and reaching out to them? How are we finding them?
So this is a piece of work that I'm particularly proud of. Over the last 2 years, under the leadership of the WIB and our department, we've actually revisioned and repurposed our whole system. What we know in the city of Los Angeles is that we have a very high dropout rate. And what we also know is that we have a very high population of kids who have not completed, by definition, their high school diploma. And without a high school diploma, we know all the negative economic impacts that happens to them personally. We also know what happens to us as a city because it impacts our tax base. We've been working with hand in glove with LA Unified. Mr. Zimmer, who we know well, has really been our key champion on the board. And with their staff at LA Unified, we've actually are going to jointly fund our system. They've made an initial investment, even though they're taking some dramatic cutbacks throughout. They found resources to invest about $700,000.
And they have WIA dollars.
They have WIA dollars. This is not coming out of their WIA. This is coming out of their Health and Human Services side. So every one of our new centers, well, let me talk about the purpose first. The purpose of our new centers is to really be a dropout recovery centers. No one likes that name, so we're not going to use that name. But the real purpose is to cut through what we were doing before, which was in isolation, trying to get folks back to school. Mm-hmm. Right now, LA Unified has a list of nearly 20,000 young people who should be in school who are not. Plus, we know that there's another approximately 40 to 50,000 young people around the city under the age of 21 without a high school diploma that needs to get reconnected. So rather than us doing a shotgun approach, we're going to work directly with LA Unified and work from their lists. One of the key reasons why we want the partnership is because we can't have access to their data and their information because of federal privacy laws, but they can have access to their own data. Mm-hmm. So they're going to be our front end part of our system. We're going to use their lists, go directly to the households, and we have 3 different measures that we're going to use. One is by telephone, one by mail, but the third one is actually go knock on doors and actually get the Garcia family, get the Jackson family, get the Smith family into or back into school and connect them with our system. We think in terms of revisioning our system this way, we're going to probably double the number of young people we're going to return to school.
Who's going to visit them?
It will be a combination of our staff, or I mean, our community-based providers with LA Unified. One of the things we've done over the last 2 years has been a student recovery day that we jointly have done with LA Unified and the city. In that one day, when we did a focus effort, we were able to reach over 1,100 young people, re-enroll 800 in one day. So doing this more systemically, we know that we're going to be able to hit much larger numbers than what we're currently doing, but we'll have direct information. The second part of it is that LA Unified will be able to access, they have a very good data system, access all the previous records. We would spend 10-15% of our time tracking down report cards and former testing, and here we're going to have direct electronic access to that information through their pupil services counselors. They're going to be housed directly with our community-based agencies, and we've been testing this with YPI currently in Hollywood for our Family Source system. So we know it works and it can work. And then with that, our system providers will be 13 new providers that have a minimum service level of 70% of out-of-school youth, which nationally will probably be the highest in the country and will be a leader on this issue. We do think that by connecting, firstly, young people to their educational programming will be a huge benefit to them, their families, and the city. And then we'll be able to find them the right workforce program, including Youth WIA.
The youth jobs piece, which we've had funded, during our funds much more aggressively, where are we at right now in terms of, and I know that some of us have kicked in individual money to try to supplement in small ways, but where are we overall, and what sort of ideas do we have for youth employment for this summer?
So we're going to be close to 5,000. And first
what
of
was
all,
our peak?
Our peak was in the last 5 years was close to 16,000. And we do appreciate your efforts as well as a number of the council efforts. Mr. Parks last year led the budget committee to put in an additional $1 million when we knew it was a very, very difficult budget. So we do appreciate that, Councilman Parks. And we are working in partnership with the LA Chamber of Commerce on the private sector side, as well as the mayor's office to try to get the private sector to do additional hiring than they would do currently.
And the commitment to hiring for a company or for an entity out there is what? What sort of commitment do we look for?
We give them a broad range or a menu. So anything from doing an internship during the summer to actually hiring them as a paid staff member. What we ask, if they can't do either of those, is $2,000, which has been really our cost to put a young person to work for about 140 hours during the summer and to be case managed. So we do have folks like Wells Fargo who have done both. They've actually written a check to the city for $125,000 and allowed us to hire folks directly, and they've actually brought in 10 to 15 interns directly.
So how much is it per job about on average?
About 2,000.
About 2,000. So if we're to get back to our peak is another $20 million worth of funding.
Yeah, in combination, a big piece of that had been LA Unified and what they do through their work experience office and working directly with them. And every year they've picked up about 4,000 young people because of their cutbacks that they've had. They haven't confirmed a number for us as of yet.
We do expect it to be higher than 5,000 with some LAUSD.
Yeah, but it'd probably be closer, rather than them doing the 4,000 or 5,000 they've done previously, would probably be closer to 1,000 to 1,500. But we didn't include those numbers as of yet until we get hard confirmation.
Gotcha. I know that my staff had talked to you, and it may be too late to set this in motion, but looking at the proprietaries, I mean, do we have any ongoing program with either DWP or the port or the airport for summer youth jobs right now?
So I'll do the politically incorrect
Please go ahead.
Response.
Hey, it's a safe space here.
Yeah.
Famous last words.
Right. So, and with all due respect to the proprietaries, they do a number of small programs, but given their size, given their budget, I personally, and I'll take it so I don't get Richard in trouble, as personally, I do think they don't do enough. And
Do they have any of these youth jobs?
Excuse me?
Do they have any of these youth jobs coming from the proprietaries?
Yes, every year they do contribute a very small number, usually been less than less than 100, I think, in total, and that including the airport, the harbor, DWP. You know, personally, I do think they could and should step up much greater to do a direct hiring in the 500 range of young people in their particular district. And I know they have funding restrictions and so forth, but I think given the size, they should actually contribute more to this.
That would only cost about $800,000 according to my calculations. But
Yeah, so we run up to
I'll be-
500 and make it, you know.
I'll reach out to them and see what we can do. I know it's time is of the essence. One last thing, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Parks too. The ex-offender program. Can you walk me through what we're doing now with realignment and what sort of decisions the board made to try to either strengthen or just continue ex-offender initiative?
So Jaime Pacheco's here. I'll ask him to come up for a minute, who's been our leader on this.
I may thought he wasn't going to be called up to the table, and then all of a sudden,
When I looked at him, he was hiding. I could see him.
I could tell you wanted to come forward, Jaime.
So one of the main things that we've done with the county sheriff and the county WIB is actually enter into discussions about 6 to 7 months ago. We've always done small offender programs, and I would say small. They've usually been under 100 individuals. But with realignment, that changed the complete game of the number of folks coming back to our communities. As you know, Los Angeles has the highest percentage of folks coming back to any particular community, but it's not just evenly distributed around Los Angeles. It is coming back into the heart of South Los Angeles with the highest unemployment rate. It's coming back into the heart of Central Los Angeles and East Los Angeles. We've entered into agreement and actually developed an MOU with the sheriff's department to do front-end work as inmates are being released, to be able to at least educate them and inform them about the availability of the work source centers and some of the programs that we have. Jaime's been very aggressive in actually seeking some additional grants and actually has coming up a ticket to work program that also is going to impact this particular population. I'll let him explain.
Good morning. Jaime Pacheco Orozco with the Community Development Department. We have spent a significant amount of time and resources trying to develop a stronger relationship with the County Sheriff's Department and with the California Department of Correctional Rehabilitation. We have aggressively sought out funding to target this population. We've developed a couple of online training modules to develop the capacity within our workforce development system. This week, in fact, we have a training with the County Sheriff's Department on reaching into the jail population as part of the AB 109 realignment activity. We are working with the California Health Incentives Initiative Improvement Program to make this training available statewide, so that it's not just impact us, but the larger. We're working closely with the county workforce investment board and the other local workforce investment areas to expand the training to them as well. We know that this is a regional issue; it's not just a city issue; it's a statewide issue overall. We've aggressively have sought additional funding. As Robert mentioned, we do have a Ticket to Work program. We applied to California Workforce Investment Board, submitted an application to the Department of Labor to secure funds to serve folks with disabilities. We know that 25% of the population that is incarcerated has a learning disability, so this allows us to access those funds to provide services to this population. As part of the Ticket to Work program, folks who are SSI or SSDI recipients are eligible to receive services at a number of different providers. The city has just become an employment network under the Social Security Administration's Ticket to Work program, which would enable us to serve more folks who have disabilities in our system. The WIB, through the leadership of the WIB, we set aside 10% of the folks to be served would be folks with disabilities, and we know that this is a big population of the folks who are ex-offenders. We're continuing to work with the Department of Corrections to secure additional funding down the line.
How many folks do you hope to serve, ex-offenders, this coming year?
How many do we have to serve? Or we
Do
proposing?
you hope to serve?
Well, if we're setting aside 10% of the folks of our population to be served as folks with disabilities, and a quarter of those would be folks who are ex-offenders, it'd probably be somewhere on the order of 500 or so folks. It's a small number, but it's significantly larger than most other workforce investment areas.
And if you're an ex-offender without a disability, we're
still
into the mainstream.
Yeah, we're
programs,
still
but-
working. I mean, the reality is most offenders have a disability, a substance abuse, mental health issue, are those. When I talk about the 25%, it is the learning disability component. But if you don't have a disability and you simply are an ex-offender, we are working with a number of organizations to provide those services. We currently have funding through the California Department of Rehabilitation, Correctional Rehabilitations, to provide services to about 150 folks. We are continuing to seek additional funding. Just last week, we asked the California WIB to provide additional monies to us to serve veterans and ex-offenders. We know that it's another population where we have a concern, folks coming back from the military who end up incarcerated subsequently. So we did request an additional $75,000 to $100,000. And these are small bits, but it becomes the seed money by which we leverage additional funding. So we do have a number of our community partners who have solicited funds. Friends Outside just received some money from the Department of Labor to serve ex-offenders, and they've been a partner in our New Start ex-offender activities. So rather than compete with our nonprofit providers, we've actually lended support to their solicitations for funds. So.
Mr. Sparks?
Thank you. Let me just ask, on the CLA report, June 4th, I just had a question. Why do we have a restriction on the fact that there's a 24-month restriction on going back through training? It's on page 4, paragraph under individual training account.
Just for the ITAs?
Yes. Number 1.
Okay. Mr. Parks, I think that's referencing if you had previously gone through training. Let's see, customers must not have participated in WIA ITA training for 24 months since their last registration date. The proposed revision would state that customers must have participated in WIA training for 24 months since the last date.
That pushes it out.
Yeah. One of the criticisms of the Job Training Partnership Act before they actually implemented the Workforce Investment Act was that we had a number of folks that went through serial trainings. And they may have gone through training and then they decided, well, I don't like that occupation. Then they came back and we retrained, et cetera. One of the problems we had, and the federal government was very critical of job training programs because they felt that in terms of return on investment, we were spending thousands of dollars retraining people consistently. They were coming back saying, I want to be retrained in a new occupation. So I think this is an attempt, when we put the 24 months in, what we're trying to do is make sure that if you go through training, that you spend some time on the job before we actually make you eligible for maybe some elevated training, et cetera. That's my only recollection of this policy. If you had gone through training, we paid for training, you wouldn't be eligible for going through training again unless it pertained to you actually getting training to elevate you to a higher occupation and a higher wage.
So it's, the issue then is guaranteed if they go through the training that they're going to get employment. And so the issue is that the serial training is that they would keep coming back and forth.
Right.
But we're assured that they are getting employed on the first.
Right, that's the purpose. We want you to get a job and then progress through that job. We can provide you with additional training so that you can advance, but we want you to get through the job. And previously, under the former act, folks were getting training and then coming back for training consistently, and there were no placement results. So we're cognizant of that, and that's an attempt to do that. We're open to some suggestions if you think that's too punitive.
No, I just wondered if we're guaranteed that they have a job, I just wondered if we're tracking that they do get a job, and again, I agree they should stay on the job.
Right.
But what I would not like to have is you come and get trained and you never got a job, and then you limit their ability to come back and get a recycle.
Right, now then that's on a case-by-case basis. So if we did train you and you had some difficulty finding a job, which by the way is fairly consistent now, which is a problem, we'd have to look for some other type of training. So what they're not saying in that policy is maybe you sat through classroom training You were trained as a lobotomist, and now you can't find a job. Maybe the next course of action when you come back and it's customized based on your individual need, maybe it's on-the-job training. We ask an employer to hire you and we pay 50% of the wage. What we wouldn't do, though, is send you back through classroom training.
Yeah. The thing is, I think if that's the way it works, because
That's the way it works.
What we hear in the community, and I understand the serial training, but also the other complaint is I get trained and I don't get a job.
Which is an issue. And by the way, within the plan, we're trying to respond to South LA. One of the things the WIB is very sensitive to is what's happening in South LA. When we talk about a 12.8% unemployment rate, and by the way, the unemployment rate has gone down as of April. It's 12.8%, but that's simply because people dropped out of searching for jobs. It was actually in March, it was 13%. When we talk about that, we're training a lot of people who can't find jobs. What the president had anticipated was on his side, he would create jobs. And we know what's going on global and all the issues associated with it. But the jobs have not materialized, so we have trained people out there. What we have to do is resort to some other methods of training, and we're putting $500,000, it's in the plan, to try something new in South LA where we do have folks who need more than just classroom training. They need on-the-job training and work experience where we pay the wages. We're going to try that, and those are some of the options we have available to deal with folks who are out there who are trained and can't find jobs. We're going to have to offer incentives to employers.
Well, I hope that we have a way of tracking it, because those are the concerns of, number one, people feel great that they get in a training program, but if they don't get a job, there's a concern, and if they wanted that part of that 1 or 2% that fall out of the system, then they've been trained and we're not counting them again. And then and I didn't want the 24 months that would limit some specialized or tailor-made treatment of them.
And we can make a note of that, but maybe other training modalities, maybe it doesn't duplicate the kind of training you receive. So if you have the classroom training, and we need to discuss that, perhaps there are other options since you didn't get a job as a result of classroom training. That's a good point.
That would be a good thing. Then let me just ask you also on item 1, there's a couple of dollar figures that they show that there's an available balance in the of 1.5 million that CDD is holding, and then in another category, there's about a $3.7 million additional revenue. How are those dollars going to be allocated?
You know, remember what's happening is what we presented to you in terms of this budget on next year's plan. Remember, our year coincides with the city's fiscal year, July 1st through June 30th. We're taking that money to balance out what is in the plan.
On both allocations?
Yeah, so it's not as if there is any money that's not allocable. Everything that we had in terms of carry-in will help us meet the bottom line for the next year. Now, we do report to you, because remember, we're still in a current year. We anticipate there may be some savings from this current year, and we've estimated that in the plan as well. If it's higher, we come back to you. We go to the WIB as well as to the council sometime in October to let you know from this year whether our savings are higher than the $6 million we're anticipating, $6.1 million that we've already anticipated within this plan.
Okay. And then on item 3, again, I just reiterate the concern that when we identify vendors, that we have some way of narrowing it down as to the region. If they're South LA is pretty big. If it's 8th, 9th, and 15th, it'd be very clear to know that who we can contact for those services.
We heard
citywide,
right.
You know.
We heard you in one of your conversations before. What we want to do, again, in focusing on what the intent of the council and the mayor is, when our vendors, we want to focus on vendors that are local, regional, and have some consideration as well for other communities that they serve.
Yeah, and again, I will just repeat it for the 400th time. The concern I have is that we've seen in the past, the location of the vendor plays a role in where they provide service. So if they're given a very large region, often those that are farther away from their home office get less service.
You had asked, and specifically with the sector initiatives, you want a report. We're going to hold to that in terms of where the customers come from. Yeah. Because in South LA, the pathologies of unemployment are more pervasive than anywhere else. We intend to do that. By the way, we're going to bid out our adult system. And what we tried to do is make sure with our new youth system that goes into effect July 1st, we do have the coverage, because a concern of ours is to serve people outside the areas that are most impacted by unemployment. We want to make sure that we get to those areas where folks live. So with that $500,000 that we're going to spend, and we're hopefully going to expend that immediately, I've identified census tracts in South LA where they're the census tracts with the highest, and the zip codes with the highest unemployment, and we're going to target a few initiatives just within those census tracts and those zip codes.
But I think when you do one of these massive reports, and you're talking about spending $40 million or $60 million, it'd be very important to show, when you identify a vendor, that you give some idea that they're covering what specific council districts.
Yes, we can do that, and we can produce numbers that way. And again, we heard your request last time. We're going to come back with how many people come from what communities when we report back on our sector
I
initiative.
have a tendency to repeat myself.
No, we're listening to you. We're listening to you, Council.
Thank you.
There's nothing to do with old age, Mr. Parks. It's just it's tenacity. Exactly. There you go. Two last questions. One which may be the most difficult of them all, but I wanted to. One is also in the report I forgot to ask about. The on page 2, the credit classes. Could you just explain to me what that is? Maybe our CLA could walk us in the CLA report.
The credit classes, when we send someone to credit classes?
Yeah, so what's not working? I just read it like 3 times, but I still don't get it.
Again, and when we talked about training, we have our sector initiatives. Of course, we have folks that go into work source centers and are sent out for training. There are certain courses, say you need academic remediation, you need ESL, that don't necessarily offer credit, but we realize that that's training. Because quite frankly, there are some folks who don't have a GED, et cetera, so before they can enroll in a credit class that's given by a community college or the adult schools, they may need some academic remediation to get them to the point where they are actually able to successfully complete
So the
training.
states changed that, so that doesn't count as credit, so we can't reimburse it?
It's going to make it, go ahead.
Actually, if I could clarify, the reason it specifies credit below is this is an excerpt from a directive that goes to our contractors on how to report. And just below it, there was a different cost for non-credit courses. So that's the only reason that credit is appearing here. The cost for the addition, this was about leverage resourcing on behalf of the community college district. And for the non-credit, it's less expensive. So that was about $4 and something an hour, if I'm remembering correctly, instead of the $10.60.
So could you just break that down for me? Like, so somebody goes to a class, it's a non-credit remediation class. Do they have their expenses covered now?
They do. What this was allowing is if in this example, someone paid or we paid on behalf of them the $26 per unit, or a total of $78 for the 3 unit, what it was showing is that for the colleges, it's an estimate of $10.60 per hour for the class time. So it was 54-hour class, so times $10.60, so it's $572 that the community college, the cost that they incur that they're paying through other sources, that we could report as leveraged resource.
Okay, so it's just in reporting what got that.
Right.
Just to
Okay.
be able to report.
Okay, I want to
the
be
state.
clear.
And one of the changes through the state legislation is that we won't be able to count this as part of our leverage resource anymore.
Okay. And then last, so what sort of appeals do we have? And-
Yes, you do have the youth RFP before you.
Yeah, we
I guess
have.
you've got to ask if there's anyone who wants to
Going
appeal.
no, and what process, I mean, what, if you're, we're going to go to the youth ones in a second, but in terms of anything here, this lays out, is there a process for folks, for appeals, or the criticisms you're hearing from anybody?
We went through a number of hearings through just about every committee. We've worked on this for 3 months, and at every committee session, there was time for public comment. We also allowed folks to post their comments on our websites. It's always open to public input in terms of any changes to the plan, but we did have a public comment period.
And in that public comment, were there folks who
And
criticized
most
anything
of,
about?
there were suggestions. We incorporated most of the suggestions we did get from the public, spending more money for training, making it easier for folks to go through training. So we've incorporated all the suggestions and had a vote before the WIB at various committees as to some of those suggestions.
Okay. All right, let's continue that on number 2. So I'll go ahead and move approval of Mr. Parks on number 1 and 3.
Yes, right.
The WIB report and the, I guess, CLA report,
CLA and CAO report.
the CO and CAO report, and then the CDD WIB joint report for item 1, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we'll move both those. Thank you. All right, let's take up item number 2. Don't go anywhere.
Item number 2 is a CDD and WIB joint report relative to the Workforce Investment Act Youth Worksource Center Operators Request for Proposal.
Okay. What do we have here?
So this is what I mentioned earlier on our youth funding. The city has always taken a very proactive youth strategy, and it's considered around the country as one of the leaders, in particular for the out-of-school youth population. In the past 5 years, we've actually have served close to half of our students that have been considered out of school. We wanted to take this one step further, and as I mentioned, we are now requiring that 70% of the folks being served by the system will be out of school. So we repurposed the system. We did a full-on bid that lasted, I think, around our 6th month now, from the development, from the RFP to the RFP scoring process and the appeals process, both by the WIB, and then there's an appeals panel that is a combination of a council district representative, the mayor, CDD, CLA,
The council district representative for wherever that was.
Yeah.
Individual applicant.
Chair of HCD. That's how the WIBLEO currently reads.
Oh, really?
Because there was no longer any jobs committee with the last time.
The new one, we want the Jobs Committee chair, but at the time it was
Yeah,
done,
it's fine,
it said, yeah.
But we should probably fix that just because this has jurisdiction over
Yeah.
WIB
Yeah.
stuff. So how do we do that? Does WIB have to approve that?
Actually, we're
To negotiate with
suggesting,
HUD?
no, we're coming to you with I know you're approving a temporary extension of the WIB LEO, but the permanent one that's going to come through your committee is going to suggest that.
Okay.
And Ivania is the lead in for the CLA's office. As you know, it's the tough negotiator, so she always makes sure she covers all the issues.
She
She
stepped
was
out.
here. She's still here?
Yeah.
She stepped out.
Just in time.
So we'll work with Ivania and Felipe to make those appropriate changes. We did receive 27 proposals. Within those proposals, we did look to make sure that we had full city coverage. Again, the emphasis had changed with the more on the out-of-school youth population. And the second major emphasis is what I had stated previously was the partnership with LA Unified. And we did not leave it up to chance for any CBO to come in with their own partnership. They each have their own individual relationships. But what we did is fund 6 or 7 of the counselors directly, and LA Unified is funding 6 of the counselors themselves. So we'll have 13 counselors, 1 for each of the centers. They'll be a part of the system. The other partners that we've mandated is the Family Source system and the Work Source system and the community colleges. So every one of the 13 centers will have access to all 3 of those systems. We're looking to be very aggressive of driving folks into the centers, and these are community-based centers, so they are located within the community to assure Councilman Parks that they are located directly in the areas. We did a full analysis, and there's a chart in the back in one of the exhibits of all the high schools that had the highest dropout rates within the city. So we were making sure that we were targeting those high schools and those high school communities. Our intent, like we've done in all of our other business lines, is to really build a system that we're taking advantage of the major the bureaucracies that are there, which is LA Unified, the Community College District, ourselves, as well as the Chamber of Commerce, LA EDC. We did take our time to really make this a system that is fully integrated and is going to really hopefully move the needle in the total population of out-of-school youth within the city.
Walk me through one thing, because a couple of folks have brought it up to me. How do we decide on subcontractors, especially when they're not suggested necessarily even in the applications of some of the main contractors?
Right. We did make a couple of adjustments, and I use the term partnerships between our subcontractors and our contractors. That was for coverage, and for a good example was the Helen Bernstein School. If we would took the top contractor, that contractor did not cover Bernstein High School. and wasn't in their proposal. But we knew that had a significant dropout rate. So we did look at the subcontractor or the proposed contractor that was going to serve that school, and then we made them a subcontractor to the prime.
And is that because those other ones, I mean, for instance, why wouldn't the University of California just be asked to do it themselves as opposed to giving to YPI? I mean,
primarily because either that they didn't have the relationship because it wasn't evident in their proposal, or that we saw that through the proposal process that YPI, and in this particular case, had a strong relationship already with the Bernstein. So it was, rather than trying to start a new relationship, we were building on an existing relationship.
I mean, it certainly can get somewhat confusing. I mean, I think it's great, and I understand that. I mean, to go to Lincoln, for instance, Chinatown Service Center, and I'm not singling any one group out here, just trying to understand it better. You have some folks, though, that are who have like a 70 or 72 who are funded to do subcontracting, and other ones who are higher than that, 76 or 75, who are not. Is that just because they didn't have necessarily coverage into there? And it seems like in a couple cases, it's not clear to me who yet is going to be the subcontractors.
So in almost all the cases,
20 and 21.
There was a save one. Almost of all the cases, we were trying to meet and fill holes that weren't going to be served by the current contractor. So, for example, in Lincoln High School, having Chinatown come in as a subcontractor was really to meet the growing Asian community and the language spoken by their families. The prime contractor didn't bring that to the table. The one that we're still working with is Brotherhood Crusade, and identifying their full subcontractors.
And Harbor College, that says.
And Harbor College. Harbor College has done a procurement themselves for their subcontractors. We've actually set the total amount that they have to, and we will be approving their subcontractors as they come through.
Okay. And folks who submitted late, how late were they, and is that common? What can we do to help them not be late? And
well, I'll take the first part of it, because I'll take the responsibility of
not locking the doors as they're coming back in. Generally, we re-emphasize, tell them 7 different times they have to meet this deadline or else, and we wag our finger and say it. In this particular case, we had one contractor that came in a couple minutes late, another contractor that was, I think, 20 minutes late, coming back in.
they're not like weeks late.
No, we did, and I think the staff here wanted to choke me, but we did physically take possession of them. Our process basically says we should have locked the door and not taken possession. Right. We did take possession, and we did take it to the board as part of the appeals, and really made it a policy decision of the appeals board to accept them as a late and to score them or not. But yes, and I think our next time they're going to send me off on vacation when the proposals are due. Actually, we're looking at an electronic system now to do it electronically, which will automatically lock it.
Good. Okay. Mr. Sparks, anything you want to ask? No.
Let me just ask, on the issue of, now we call it the youth service, I guess, where's the name of it? The Youth Workforce Center. How much duplication is there between that and the family source and then the other work source centers? Because they're in 3 different locations, right?
Right. So they each have a different target market. So the youth workforce centers will be very specific on the out-of-school youth and really connecting back to the education as primary focus, and then the workforce as being the next focus. The Workforce Center is focused on the adults population and predominantly serve 24 and up. If you look at our numbers, they do not serve that 18 to 21 population generally at all. And then the family source is really available as a secondary resource for the whole family. And our emphasis on the family source has been really about increasing the income and the usage and the utilization of by right federal and state programs, which we've seen a dramatic increase over the last 2 years throughout the city for CalFresh and
Actually, the family source could actually be picking up candidates out of the other two programs?
Right, and we, in each of their contracts, they're cross-referenced, and what I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, we are really looking to fully integrate all of the programs. I think we're about 85–90% there now, that there's no wrong door for any family coming into any one of our centers. They will be informed of the other resources available to them.
And my final question is, looking at your chart on attachment B with New Tech Senior High at Jordan and also Jordan, is that going to get some special attention? You got 67% dropout in one school and 40 in the other? Or if I read it correctly, every program is going to get identical amount of money?
And this is actually a special case. In the Watts community, we actually did fund two youth workforce centers, WLCAC and Yo Watts. And we do know that because of the high concentration of the housing developments there and the high concentration of poverty, it does have special needs. So there are actually two workforce centers covering the Watts community.
But on 1 and 2 where they have Jordan, that's one covering both schools?
It would be one, right.
One allocation covering
Right.
both schools?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll move approval of item 2. Thank you. And sorry, I got to run. We got to go to council.
Oh, yeah.